Hi everyone, Sam here. Welcome back to another episode of Azure Snippets. Today we're going to take a look at managed identity. So managed identity has been around for about a year or so now. It was previously called managed service identity, if you've heard of that, but it's now been renamed to managed identity. And managed identity is a tool that allows you to assign identity to services in Azure. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, because if your service, so your virtual machine or your web app has got an identity, it means you can grant it access to other Azure resources using that identity. So instead of having to use service principals, you can instead use this identity. The identity is assigned to that resource, but in addition, Microsoft are also going to handle a lot of the administration of this identity. So you don't need to worry about key management, you don't need to worry about rolling the keys on a regular basis and so on. All of that's handled for you, and it gives you a really easy way to get resources in Azure to be able to talk to other resources. So some common examples of this, a really common one is Key Vault. So a lot of the times you've got applications that are running on a VM or in a web app or in an Azure function, and they're going to need secrets. And so the best place to store these secrets is going to be Azure Key Vault. But if you're going to have Key Vault, then you need to then have that machine access Key Vault, and you need to store the service principal details in that application to access them, either the password or a certificate that allows them to access that. It's all doable, but it takes time to set up, and you've still got to store those things alongside your application. With managed identity, we are giving the function, the web app, and so on, the identity itself, which we can then grant access to Key Vault like a normal user, and then you can just access those resources directly from your application with very little changes to the application itself. So it's a really useful tool for being able to access things like Key Vault. But it can also be used for talking to other things. So I have an example where we need a machine that is going to monitor some usage, and it needs to, at certain points, increase the size of a scale set. So it's going to call the Azure API to make a call to the scale set, say, add X number of machines to this scale set. It obviously needs to authenticate to the API to be able to do that. Using managed identity makes that really simple. So not all resources in Azure support managed identity. Obviously virtual machines do. We can see the list here. You can support scale sets, app service, functions, logic apps, Data Factory v2, API management, container instances. All of those features support managed identity. So those are the things you can assign an identity to. Obviously the things they're going to access, things like Key Vault, storage and so on, all those resources need to be able to do really is support the service principal access to them, and managed identity will just work. Okay, so let's take a look at how this works. I've got a VM here. It's actually the VM I'm running on. That's in Azure, and at the moment it has no identity set up. So we're going to go to the Identity tab. And we have two options for creating identity. We have a system assigned identity or a user assigned identity, which is in preview currently. System assigned is the first one we'll look at, and this is the simplest option. What this will effectively do is when you turn it on, the VM gets its own identity. And if you turn that on another VM, it gets its own separate identity. So every VM or function or web app gets its own individual identity. So let's turn that on. Simply tick that box and hit save. And that gives you a message about how that's going to register the machine with Azure Active Directory. That's how the identity is managed. It's an Azure AD identity. So we'll click yes. And that's going to go and turn on our identity. So now our identity has been enabled. What we can do is we're going to go and grant this access to Key Vault. Okay, so I've got a demo Key Vault here, and all we're going to do is go into access policies, like you would with anything that needs to be accessing Key Vault, and click on Add New, and select Principal, and we're just going to enter the name of the VM, and you can see now we get the identity for that VM. It's as simple as that. So now we can just use it like any other user, and we're going to grant it permission to get and list some secrets. we've granted that identity access to the key vault to read and get secrets. We also need to grant it access to actually be able to read the key vault itself using the RBAC controls. So we'll do the similar sort of thing in here. We'll come and click in add, just at the key vault level. And I just want to grant this reader. So now that I've granted that read access to the key vault and access to read the keys, we can go ahead and use that identity to actually retrieve some secrets. So to do that, we need to actually connect as the managed identity. The way you do that's going to vary depending on what language your application is written in, but it's usually pretty straightforward and there's pretty good documentation on that. We're going to use PowerShell, and so we need to log into the Azure PowerShell commandlets. We'll use the login AZ account. We don't know the credentials of the managed identity, so we're going to go ahead and use the identity flag. And that's all we need to provide. So if we hit enter, that will log us in. So we're now logged into PowerShell and we can now do everything that we could do before with a normal user that has permission on resources in Azure. So let's do get AZ key secret. It's the vault name. And the secret name is secret password. And there we go. We can go and retrieve that using our managed identity. So any code that I run on this machine that uses that identity will be able to access those resources, and I don't need to worry about anything beyond turning on that identity on the machine. So that's a system assigned identity, and that's the simplest way of being able to turn on managed identity for a machine. The other option is a user assigned identity. Now, user-assigned identities are something that is created as a separate resource in Azure. It's not specifically created like the system-assigned identity is, where it's assigned directly to the machine. The user-assigned identity is a resource you create, and then you can then assign that to multiple machines. So that's the real benefit of using user-assigned, is if you want to be able to have a group of machines or applications or functions or so on be able to access resources as a common user, then you can create a user-assigned identity and then you can assign it to those resources and they all share the common identity. So we want to create a user-assigned identity to use here. So we'll just go off and look for identity. And you see there we've got managed identities. And we're going to create a new one. Demo identity, we're going to assign it to a subscription. You need to create them in a resource group. They are a resource, so we'll create that in the same resource group as the machine, and a location for the resource. To be honest, the location is just where it's going to sit in terms of creation. You can use it against resources in any region. So let's go ahead and create that. And we can now see we've got this demo identity available. So if we go back to our virtual machine, go to identity, and we're going to turn off the system assigned identity. Let's just save that. And we're now going to make use of the new demo identity. That's it. That identity is now assigned. Now, obviously, our key vault access is still assigned to the old identity, so we're going to need to go in and amend that. Again, we'll grant it reader rights, and it's called demo identity, so that's here. Slightly different icon for a user assigned one, and we'll hit that save. And similarly, we're going to add an access policy. And grant it permission to get and list secrets. Save. So that's all done. So if we just close and reopen PowerShell, and log in again, the identity flag, and that's logged us in again without issue. And we'll do secret, and the vault name is that, and the secret, again, secret password. And we're now able to get the password using that identity as well. So both options are perfectly valid. It really depends whether if you've got lots of resources that all need access to the same thing, then it's going to be easier to manage if you use a user-assigned identity, and you can then assign that to multiple machines and grant them all access to it. If you've just got the one or two machines that need access to things, or every machine needs access to different things and different levels of resources, then the system-assigned identity is fine as well. Either option, though, will give you the ability to grant those resources access to other Azure resources and then use them as part of your application. So I think it's a really useful tool. It makes things a lot more secure than having to deal with service principals and store service principal passwords or certificates on machines and so on. The credentials are getting regularly rolled by Microsoft, and it's a really useful tool. And if you're going to be having your application access resources in Azure, I'd really recommend you looking into it. I hope that's been useful for you, and I'll see you next time on Azure Snippets.